I didn't expect that I would see Nate again after breaking up. And the scene was so embarrassing. He was dressed elegantly, and his every move showed his nobility. And I, in my cheap waiter clothes, bent over to pour him a glass of wine. The man kicked my wrist as if he wanted to embarrass me on purpose. I loosened my grip in pain and the bottle fell to the ground. The dark red wine splashed and stained Nate's shoes. He smiled maliciously. "Oliver, are you so short of money after leaving me?" Neon lights flickered in the dim bar. The deafening music made my head dizzy. I walked into the box carrying a plate of fruit. At one glance, I saw Nate, my ex-boyfriend. He was wearing an expensive shirt and had opened the first notch of his collar. The blurred eyes exude a dangerous temptation. Although her disheveled clothes could be considered alluring, they did not give rise to any bad thoughts. Maybe it was the aura of a superior that made people feel afraid. Nate is no longer the boy who allows me to control him. I lowered my head, hurriedly brushed the hair behind my ears, put down the plate, and left in a hurry. "Stop, turn around." A cold voice called me from behind. Nate's voice is as good as always. I used to like pressing him down and listening to his cool voice take on color. But at this moment, I just want to escape. I turned around stiffly, lowered my voice, and tried my best not to be recognized by the person in front of me. "What's the matter, sir? Pour me some wine." Nate's voice was lazy, but for some reason, I seemed to hear a hint of anger in it. I bent down obediently. The cheap waiter's shirt made an unpleasant friction sound. The strands of hair on my forehead hung down, covering half of my face. I saw Nate's cold eyes through the gaps in the hair. I prayed to God in my heart. Pray that Nate doesn't recognize me. Unfortunately, the opposite happened. The pair of leather shoes below my sight rose up without warning and kicked me on the wrist. The pain was so piercing that I had to accidentally break the bottle in my hand. The exquisite glass bottle exploded, dark red wine splashed, and the water stains got on Nate's leather shoes. The loud noise stunned my brain. This bottle of wine costs $200,000. How should I explain this to the foreman? Nate looked at my blank expression and smiled maliciously. "Oliver, long time no see." "It's been a long time indeed, 6 years. We have never been apart for so long." "I'm not feeling well. I have been sickly since I was a child." I watched with envy as children of my age ran around and played in groups. And all I could do was stay in my house, looking out the window. I had an extremely lonely childhood and had no playmates. It wasn't until he was 6 years old that his father brought Nate home. The father came in holding a little boy's hand. The light from the setting sun shone through the open door onto his back, casting a layer of warm glow on it. I stood on the second floor, looking down at the little boy who was timidly grabbing his father's clothes. "Oliver, this is Nate, the child I adopted from the orphanage. From now on, he will be your friend." I rushed downstairs excitedly, and my fast running made my sickly pale face turn red. Nate was held tightly in my arms. "I'm Oliver, we're friends from now on." After a while, I heard Nate's childish voice. "Okay, young master." Nate was with me throughout my school years. After entering middle school, my health improved a lot and I became a qualified young master. I do everything: smoking, drinking, skipping classes, and fighting. Nate was responsible for cleaning my ass. After I skipped classes for the umpteenth time, my father couldn't stand it anymore. But he couldn't bear to punish me. He made Nate kneel in the study, took off his shirt, and then pulled out a thick, long whip and beat him mercilessly. It was clearly my fault, but Nate took the beating for me. The sound of the whip breaking flesh and the harsh reprimands from his father were intertwined. "I told you not to take Oliver out to play, and to take Oliver out to make friends with bad people." Blood oozed from Nate's back, burning the tip of my heart. I rushed over crying, covering Nate's bloody back, and begged my father for mercy. "Dad, I was wrong. I will never skip class again. Please don't hit Nate." I cried so hard that my father's nose and tears were streaming down his face. I didn't know if he was tired of beating me or if he was moved by my sincere plea. He let Nate go. I dragged the bruised Nate back to the room. There wasn't a single piece of good meat on his back. I stroked my fingers along, and the hot wound on his back burned my fingertips. I just felt my heart throbbing with pain. I took out the disinfectant tools and helped Nate clean the wound on his back. He lay on the bed without saying a word. The air seemed to stagnate at this moment, and the only sound in the huge space was Nate's unbearable heavy breathing. My nose felt sore and tears started falling again. The big tears fell on Nate's wound. He exclaimed and jumped up from the bed. Nate held me in his arms and wiped the tears from my face with his warm hands. Then he solemnly kissed me right under the eyes. "Young master, please stop crying. Your tears hurt me." I buried my head in Nate's chest in a helpless manner. It was clearly him who got beaten, but why was it that I was the one who needed comfort in the end? Nate spent a week in the hospital recovering from his injuries before returning to school. When he returns to school, I have a big surprise prepared for him. I have dyed the colorful hair back to black and bought a new school uniform. I sat obediently in the front row, with books and test papers in front of me. You know what, he really looks like a good student. I moved closer to Nate, held his face in my hands, and took in the surprise in his eyes. Then hooked his hand. "Nate, supervise me, study hard, and don't let the old man find out your mistakes again, okay?" Nate stared at me blankly. After a long while, he finally found his voice and choked up a "okay." "Oliver." Nate's cold voice forced me to pull myself away from my memories. I looked at him, but I just couldn't connect the noble Nate in front of me with the boy in my memory. Time has left too many marks on him. I looked down at the broken wine bottle on the floor, and my eyes suddenly felt sore. The years of hard work after the family's bankruptcy and the grievance of seeing his beloved again are intertwined at this moment. Suddenly I felt tired. I squatted down and slowly picked up the broken glass on the ground. The sharp edge cut my finger and the bright red blood kept flowing. Once you bleed, you can't shed tears anymore. I held back my tears, daring only to let them fill my eyes but not let them fall. "Oliver." Nate called me again. I looked up at him helplessly, tears streaming down my face as I raised my head. The atmosphere in the box dropped to freezing point, and the people he brought with him tried to smooth things over. "Nate, this waiter." Before he could finish his words, Nate's slightly aggressive voice interrupted him. "Get out." When I looked up again, Nate and I were the only ones left in the box. He leaned over and reached out his hand to me, and the moment I put my hand on it, he squeezed my wrist hard. "Oliver." He called my name for the third time. Nate grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the elevator without saying anything. There were only him and I in the narrow space. I don't know where he turned into a cotton swab and put it against the small cut on my hand. It was just a small wound and it wasn't bleeding much anymore. But Nate still stubbornly took out a cotton swab to disinfect my wound and pressed it hard on my wound as if to vent his anger. I pulled the hem of Nate's suit and acted coquettishly towards him. "Pain. I'm sorry." Nate swallowed the last two words of his apology back into his stomach, but his movements became slower. I looked at the man's frowning brows, and my heart melted somehow. 7. Nate dragged me upstairs to the lounge area. This place is not very clean. The first and second floors are bars and KTVs that are ostensibly used as a cover, and further up are rooms where guests can do whatever they want. Nate pushed the door open and pushed me onto the waterbed in the middle. Lying on it, I felt like my body had no support and was wrapped up from head to toe. Nate leaned on top of me. I gently pushed his shoulder and begged Nate, "Don't do it here, it's too dirty." He remained unmoved, and there was a complex emotion in his eyes that I couldn't understand. I looked Nate straight in the eyes. "Brother Nate, please." He carried me on his shoulders with a gloomy look. "Why are you still so squeamish?" Nate scolded me, pressing his hard bone against my abdomen, making my stomach churn. I looked at Nate complainingly. Why is he so unkind? Nate took me home. It turned out to be our former home. Ever since Oliver's family went bankrupt, all the properties under my father's name have been seized, including my former home. At that time, all we knew was that it was auctioned off by the court and sold very quickly. A few years later, a new business tycoon bought the house for twice the price. There were rumors that Oliver's family was making a comeback, and the first step was to buy back their former mansion. I just smiled when I heard this rumor. After all, I was busy working 3 jobs a day to support the high expenses of my father in the ICU. Unexpectedly, it was indeed bought by Oliver's family. He is just the follower of Oliver's young master. Nate carried me to the second floor, where I lived in the bedroom. The furnishings and even the bedding are almost the same as they were at that time. He threw me on the bed. "Oliver, are you short of money?" I nodded under his burning gaze. "Be with me and I'll need your money." Nate pressed on top of me, kissing me eagerly. This is my second time with Nate. His behavior was not gentle and was as unfamiliar as the first time. It seems that Nate has been too busy expanding his business empire in recent years to find love. The blockage in my heart suddenly didn't feel so bad anymore. Nate is still clean. Nate only has me. I kissed Nate's cheek happily. "Don't worry about the wine, just put it on my account. From now on, you will always follow me until I want to separate." I leaned in Nate's arms, quietly waiting for what was to come. He actually stopped talking. After thinking for a long time, I finally bit my lip and took the initiative to hint to him. "My father is in very bad health now and is in the ICU." Nate's eyes darkened. "You want money?" I shook my head. After I accepted the money, my relationship with Nate became a transaction. "Can you help me find a good doctor for my father?" Nate smiled and said nothing. I hooked Nate's pinky finger and shook it back and forth, looking at him pitifully with wide eyes. "Honey, please." Nate seemed to be frightened by my shocking name, and the smile that hadn't reached his eyes just now turned into a genuine smile. He nodded in agreement. It was late at night, and I felt weak and was about to fall asleep. Nate poked me in the waist instead. When I looked up, I met those big eyes shining in the darkness. "You really don't want money? Why?" Before the chaotic brain started to think, the mouth spoke the answer. I put my arms around Nate's neck and whispered in his ear. "Because I owe you this." I owe Nate a lot. I tricked him into having his first time. When I came of age, Oliver's family went bankrupt. After hearing the news, I looked at Nate with a sad face. Nate has been on my mind for a long time. Whether it was the friendship that grew up with me, or the fact that he comforted me after being punished by my father because of me, it was enough to make my heart move. I thought, let me indulge myself for once. So I drugged Nate and dragged him to my bed. I said, "Nate, you be my boyfriend." He nodded imperceptibly. He called my name and said, "I love you." However, when he woke up the next morning, Nate was gone. I never saw him again until my family went bankrupt. He is my little follower, my playmate, my dog, but that doesn't mean he is gay and can do that kind of thing with me without any burden. The fact that he nodded last night was only due to the disparity in our status. I am not a young master anymore, so there is no need for him to play emotional games with me. I think Nate must be relieved to know that my family went bankrupt. Be thankful that you don't have to be a disgusting homosexual and obey a spoiled young master like me. Otherwise, why would you refuse to come and see me? 11. I got up at noon. The quilt beside me had already deflated, and its body temperature was too stingy to leave for me. It was freezing cold. I propped myself up and got up. There was a card lying on the bedside table. Nate paid me anyway. I turned on my phone. Last night, when we were in the heat of passion, Nate bit my shoulder and stared at me as I added his contact information. "Nate, I've left your pocket money by your bed. The password is your birthday." "Nate, spend as much as you want. As long as you have enough money." I clutched the card angrily. Nate really wants to use money to distance himself from me? But our current status is not equal. Even my father's illness requires Nate's help. What can I use to ask him for help? I accepted the card. I thought that when my father recovered, I would return everything Nate had given me and tell him that I loved him. The kind of love that makes me want to spend my whole life with him. I didn't spend the money Nate gave me. Still doing 2 or 3 minutes of work a day, including working in a bar at night. But what was unusual was that one of today's customers was an old acquaintance of mine. Paul is the one who once pursued me. He also tried to force me after my family went bankrupt. But I dodged him, and he harassed me relentlessly for 2 years until he found a higher family alliance. But today, Paul opened 10 bottles of expensive wine, stuffed a check for $10,000 into the mouth of each bottle, and then looked at me teasingly. How much you can get depends on your ability. The dim light made his face even more disgusting. I don't want to take his disgusting money. She pretended not to understand his game, put down the fruit plate, and left in a hurry. But he was pulled back by a strong force. Paul looked unhappy. Oliver, why are you pretending? You need money to sell yourself out, but you're still pretending. After saying that, he asked the people next to him to press me down on the sofa. No matter how hard I struggled, I was unable to defeat the 2 bodyguards who had been trained for years. Paul shook the bottle and moved closer to me. His fingers clamped around my chin. Baby, you have to drink it now. I closed my eyes. The expected spicy liquor did not pour into my throat. Instead, I heard the sound of a blunt object hitting me, and the hand that was pinching my chin loosened. I opened my eyes and met Nate's violent eyes. Paul knelt beside the sofa, holding his head in pain. Nate kicked him. How dare you touch him? Paul didn't retreat but instead moved forward, grabbing Nate's trouser legs like a lackey and apologizing repeatedly. Nate, I'm sorry, I didn't know he was yours. Nate kicked again, kicking off the plaster on his leg. He leaned over, picked me up gently and left. I half-heartedly thought that Nate probably still loved me a little. Otherwise, how could you vent your anger for me? When we got home, Nate rubbed the red mark on my chin from being pinched. The action was extremely intimate. The voice was a cold command. You are not allowed to do this job anymore. I looked into Nate's affectionate peach blossom eyes that could make anyone fall in love with him. I wanted to agree, but I had to refuse. This is my fastest way to make money. If I don't make money this way, how can I pay back the hospital bills that Nate paid for my father? But I couldn't say no, so I could only look at Nate quietly. He let out a long sigh. This job is a bit dangerous. You really can't do it anymore. Nate's tone softened, and he seemed to have returned to the past in a trance. I am still the young master, and Nate is still my little follower. Whenever I was angry, he would always soften his tone and comfort me. Just like now. That's jiaching, right? This isn't the first time I've encountered a rude guest. Every time I encountered this before, I would apologize with a smile and treat myself as a wine barrel, pouring wine into my stomach desperately to gain the guest's forgiveness. The days without Nate just passed like that. Why do I want to cry now? My throat was choked with sobs, and my tone was tinged with weakness that even I couldn't detect. But I stopped studying after the college entrance exam. I can't find a good job with my conditions. Nate looked at me with his eyes wide open, looking very surprised. After a long while, Nate found his voice again. Take the language test again and I'll send you to study abroad. This time I was shocked. I wanted to kiss Nate and ask him if he loved me. But I dare not, because Nate is now a rising businessman and may become a big shot in the future. And I'm just a young man from a bankrupt family. So I just pressed my lips against Nate's. Say gratefully, thank you, Nate. 15. Nate arranged for his father to be transferred to another hospital. It is the most authoritative hospital in the country for the treatment of uremia. After the family went bankrupt, the father was anxious and went to ask for help from his old friends. He drank over and over again at the table, and after several months of drinking, his body developed problems. He went to the hospital for a checkup and found out he had uremia. I begged my father to go to the hospital and recuperate while I tried to find a way to make money. The burden of supporting the family fell on me. My grades were average, and my father had already made plans for me to study abroad. But the plan fell through because the family had no money. My college entrance examination score was only good enough to get into an ordinary private college. But I can't afford the high tuition fees. 4 years of school time was a waste for me. So the difficult decision was made. Drop out of school and work. I work as an English tutor for children during the day and deliver food when I have nothing to do. Work as a waiter in a bar at night. A pretty waitress like me is seen as an object of teasing by those customers. I have met many guests like Paul who can only please both sides. Although I was touched by some dirty hands, I cleverly avoided their excessive requests to take me upstairs every time. The guests scolded me for being ungrateful, slapped me in the face, and dragged me forcefully to take me upstairs. I struggled as hard as I could to escape. I'm just a prostitute, why should I be so noble? The guests scolded me like this. What am I being proud of? I don't know. Maybe one day I will pay off my debts, find Nate, slap him in the face, and ask him why he left and refused to see me. Then I hugged him and told him that I missed him and that I had suffered a lot to start over with him. But now, the pungent smell of disinfectant from the hospital penetrated my nostrils. I looked at the door in front of me bitterly. Single VIP room. The name of the attending physician written on the door of the ward is the name of the most authoritative person in this field. I could only hug him and call him Nate, emotionally in a flattering manner. 16. I opened the door and went to see my father. Because I was busy making money, I seldom visited him. His thin figure lay on the bed, thinner than the last time I was here. He also looked even less energetic than the dignified and generous figure I remembered. Oliver, it will cost a lot more to transfer here. The previous hospital is fine. Don't tire yourself out. My father looked at me with eyes full of love. I walked over and sat beside his bed. Father, it's Nate. I saw Nate these few days. He's rich now. He heard that you were not in good health, so he wanted to repay you for your adoption. It was he who suggested transferring you to another hospital. I hid the dirty details between Nate and I and explained the whole story to his father in a way that he could accept. Unexpectedly, after hearing this, his father became angry instead of unhappy and started coughing violently. The old man suddenly perked up, forced himself to sit up from the bed, and pointed at my nose. No, you have to return it to me and don't accept his money. Don't think I don't know. My father suddenly shut up, but he still looked very angry. I smelled something wrong. What does he know? Thinking of this, I asked, know what? My father pretended not to hear me and lay back on the hospital bed with his back to me. Why does the father have such strong emotions towards Nate? After he adopted Nate from the orphanage, Nate's food, clothing, and other expenses were the same as mine. The servants call me young master, Master Nate Shin. As for the conflicts between my father and Nate, there were probably only 2 times when he punished Nate because of my willfulness. But Nate would never hold a grudge against his father for that incident. They must have some new celebration somewhere I don't know about. 17. After spending a day with my father in the hospital, I went home. The house was dark. It was late at night, but Nate had not returned home yet. I went into the kitchen and made myself a simple midnight snack. After eating and drinking and wiping my mouth and lying on the sofa, I suddenly thought of Nate. He hasn't eaten the food I cooked yet. Make him some midnight snack too. I jumped up and went back into the kitchen. He has the same taste as me, he likes spicy food. I cooked 2 dishes for him, and even though I turned on the range hood, the smell of chili made my eyes hurt. At the same time, I also made him a bowl of sobering soup. Since he didn't come back so late, he must have gone out for a drink or a social event. Nate came back just as I finished cooking. He walked into the kitchen and looked at me in surprise. The shock in his eyes seemed to be questioning. Where did I come from, a demon that possessed Oliver? Thank you for your hard work. I will hire a servant tomorrow and let him do all these chores from now on. Does it have to be so distant? I pulled a frown on my face and looked at Nate with dissatisfaction. He picked up the hangover soup from the table and drank it in one gulp. He only took 2 pieces of food with his chopsticks. I ate outside, so I'm not very hungry. Nate slowly wiped his mouth and put the used dishes into the dishwasher. He went into the study and said he was going to take care of some official business. But I saw through the crack in the door that he was eating a piece of bread. Liar, big liar. I cooked it so deliciously, why don't you want to eat it? I was angry and ready to lose my temper. Choose to stay close to the bed at night with your back to Nate. But he held me in his arms, and I fell into an extremely warm embrace. Good night. Nate whispered in my ear. The faint anger and strong grievance were suddenly soothed. I felt sleepy. Am I forgetting something? Forget it, let's talk about it when I wake up tomorrow. When I woke up, Nate wasn't around again. I looked at the chat screen with Nate on my phone. Forget it, I'd better ask him face to face about this kind of thing. When he comes back in the evening, I'll ask him looking into his eyes. But asking him doesn't mean I can't find clues myself. I sneaked into the study and found his information. It's strange that he graduated from college last year. He left my house only after the college entrance examination. With his performance, he will definitely be one of the top 2. He didn't study medicine, so why did he go to college for 5 years? I searched Nate's study for a long time but couldn't find any useful clues. As for the room where my father lived before, I opened the door and saw an empty house. There was no furniture or other furnishings at all. I stood in front of the door for a long time, feeling the huge visual impact. Nate definitely has a grudge against his father. For what? 19. I went to the hospital to see my father, but he saw a tall figure outside the ward door. He was wrapped in a windbreaker, and his whole body gave off an aura that said, "Keep away from strangers." I recognized it right away. It was Nate. I hid outside the ward and listened to the conversation between the 2 people inside. All I heard was Nate saying, "Your son is mine now. I'm gay. We're together." Then came the sound of my father's rapid, heavy breathing, mixed with a few extremely dirty words. My heart felt like it was being grabbed by a pair of huge hands. My father knows about the unclear relationship between Nate and I? But why did Nate tell him this? Does he hate his father to this extent? Keep me to stimulate my father. He was willing to destroy his own reputation to make his father suffer. Tears burned my hands. I covered my mouth, but the sobs still leaked out from between my fingertips. It hurt so much. Who's outside? The crying gave me away. I fled before Nate came out of the room. I stood in the stairwell, slumped over with my back against the wall. Let the crying flow out. 20. I never doubted Nate's feelings for me. Even if it wasn't the love between lovers, we had been with each other for more than 10 years. Even though he hated me for what happened the first time, he got his revenge. I thought the gap between us was only the gap in status. But now, I dare not confirm it. I'm not sure if Nate asked me to be his lover because he still had feelings for me, or to get back at me for my first time with him, or to get back at my father. The answer I'm afraid to hear is the last one. 21. I left Nate. I left the card he gave me on the table and didn't touch a penny of the money in it. I left him a message before leaving. Nate, if you think I taste good, please keep this in mind and continue to treat my father. He is an extremely proud man. I wouldn't do something like taking advantage of everything and then going back on my word. I took the green train to another city. My work is not limited by region. In other cities, I can still be a good English tutor. 22. When I came out of my student's house and was about to go to the rental house, I saw a familiar figure. Nate's tall figure leaned against the street. When he saw me going out, he walked towards me eagerly. I saw the dark circles under his eyes, the red bloodshot in his eyeballs, and the unshaved stubble on his chin. He doesn't seem to be having a good time these days. Nate held my wrist tightly. "Oliver, why don't you want me again?" 23. What do you mean by again? What do you mean by not wanting him anymore? My brain suddenly became confused, and tears expressed my emotions before my mouth did. Nate carefully held up my face, his expression full of confusion and helplessness. "You didn't want mine first. Why are you crying first?" I couldn't hold back my emotions any longer. I threw myself at Nate and bit his shoulder. The man did not stop me, but just repeated the question. "Young master, why are you crying?" The sound was as beautiful as clear spring water, evoking all my emotions. I let go of his shoulders, raised my head and stared at him with my scarlet eyes. Are you reuniting with me just to take revenge on my father?" The words turned around on the tip of my tongue and were swallowed back into my stomach, and what came out was the knot in my heart from even longer ago. "Why do you say I don't want you? It was you who left me first. You slept with me and then just walked away." Nate smiled bitterly, his peach eyes showing depression. "Don't you know? After what happened to us, your father sent me to electroshock therapy. I finally got through that painful time and came back to find you, but someone else was already living in Oliver's family mansion." His words came to me like a bolt of thunder. What Nate said next shocked me even more. "He thinks I am the one who led you astray and made you like men, so he wants to punish me to go to treatment. He said if I don't agree, he will punish me. But how can I bear to see you suffer? 24. Nate told me the whole story. It turns out that my father knew all along that I drugged him. He heard what we were doing, but I didn't expose him for fear of scaring him. Nate was not so lucky. He was sent for electroshock therapy and missed the college entrance examination application. After a period of treatment, he wanted to come back to see me, but found that my house was already empty. In despair, he jumped off a building to commit suicide, but was rescued. I went back to high school again. I was working and studying at the same time, and I had a mental breakdown, so I didn't score as high as I did the first year. In the end, I only got into a bottom-tier 985 university. He seized the opportunity of the times and started a company, and his business is booming. He went to that bar because he knew I worked there and wanted to visit me. 25. Nate remained calm as he told me his story, as if it was just someone else's story. But I heard my hands and feet become cold and my whole body tremble. Nate suffered a lot because of my willfulness. I held him loosely. I'm sorry. You weren't forced that day. What you did to me, it was all my fault. I like you, but I'm afraid you don't have any feelings for me, so. I felt guilty and didn't dare to look at Nate, so I buried my head deeply in his arms. Will Nate get mad and hate me when he finds out? I don't know, I just know I can't lie to Nate. The horrible scene I imagined did not happen, and Nate put his hand on my head. I volunteered. Isawa you get me. Nate patted my back soothingly. Young master, I like you too. 26. I was stunned by this sudden good news. Pointing at Nate and calling him, you, over and over again. Nate poked my face with his finger in amusement. Young master, I have always been by your side. I thought you already understood my feelings. Nate looked at me plaintively. I always thought that you didn't love me. I only found out today that Oliver's family went bankrupt after sending me to electroshock therapy. After I received treatment, I wanted to go back to look for you, but I couldn't find you. I thought you thought I was boring and didn't want me anymore. When I first found you in the bar, you refused to acknowledge me. I thought you hated me. That's why I treated you so badly. Nate's voice got smaller and smaller as time went on, and he sounded very guilty. How could he be so bad to me? It was just a minor bullying, nothing compared to the punishment I received before. I squeezed Nate's hand. Do you still hate my father? Nate nodded, then quickly shook his head. I should hate him, but he's your father, so I don't hate him. Nate doesn't hate me because of me, but he loves his father because of me. So you just told him that we were together. What did he say? Nate was silent. The obsidian pupils stared at me intently. Do you really want to hear this? I nodded seriously. He said, I have been forcing you all along, and you don't love me at all. What nonsense. 27. I followed Nate back to the city where we were before. The first thing I did after getting off the plane was to ask him to drive me to the hospital. Why? This time it was Nate's turn to be confused. I want to make it clear to him that I love you and I want to be with you. 28. After much thought, I locked Nate out of the ward. I went in by myself and had a heart-to-heart with my father. I sat on the sofa opposite my father's bed and got straight to the point. Dad, I've always liked Nate. You idiot. My father was so angry that he rolled his eyes and pounded the bed. It's all my fault that I'm useless. I don't make any money and I'm sick, leaving you. My father was too embarrassed to say the second half of the sentence, but he said it anyway. I made you like a man. I walked over to my father and held his hand. Father, I really like him, and we are together because we both want to. You know about that ridiculous incident. I drugged him. If you insist on forcing him, then I was the one who forced him from the beginning to the end. I stared into my father's eyes. After a long time, my father compromised. You didn't lie to me? I nodded solemnly. I swear I truly love him, and being with him is what I truly desire. My father turned his face away as I looked at him. Then it's up to you. My son has grown up and I can't control him anymore. Once again, my father turned his back on me, but this time I knew the whole reason. He waved at me. Get out of here. As soon as I left the ward, Nate came over and held my hand. How about it? I pretended to be in a difficult situation. Nate looked at me worriedly. It's done. Father agrees with us. Nate's eyes lit up. If he were a puppy, his tail would have been shaking like a propeller at this moment. Let's go celebrate and have a meal. Nate looked at me, wanting to say something but stopping himself. Finally I said it. Can we not go eat hot pot? Didn't he love hot pot the most before? Nate seemed to be afraid that I would be unhappy, so he quickly added a sentence. Hot pot is fine. Can we order a shabu shabu? I can't handle spicy food. I looked at him puzzledly. Before I could even finish my words, he gave me an explanation. I can never eat spicy food. I only pretended to like it because you liked it. So you don't like me now? Nate's face turned red after hearing what I said, and he waved his hands and denied it repeatedly. No, I like you very much. I love you very much. It's just that I'm getting older and my stomach can't take it anymore. After saying that, Nate carefully observed my expression. I pulled his cheek. Then you must tell me what you like and dislike in the future. I don't want you to accommodate me. I will feel bad if you are uncomfortable. Nate's eyes sparkled. Yes, sir. Nate extra. I hate Oliver. I hate that he was born into a noble family and was surrounded by money and love since birth. And I was adopted by his father as a servant to keep him happy. Oliver is such a fool. He never failed to take advantage of the good resources at home to enrich himself with knowledge. He hated learning enough. I hate him for being so stupid. But I sadly thought that perhaps only poor people like me would want to change our fate, while people like Oliver who were born with a silver spoon in their mouths would enjoy a life of luxury even if they knew nothing. There was a dim light in the kitchen and rustling sounds. I tiptoed over and found that it was Oliver who opened the refrigerator door. He was very frightened when he saw me coming, and tried to please me by snuggling into my arms. Brother Nate, please don't tell my father. I had evil thoughts. No, or I'll tell your father about you eating secretly. Nate grabbed the corner of my clothes, and I saw tears as big as beans rolling out of his eyes. His eyes were full of pleading. I just wanted to tease him, not make him cry. I hurriedly wiped away the tears from the corners of his eyes. Oliver looked at me pitifully. Please don't tell Dad. I'm not in good health and he doesn't allow me to eat too much chocolate, but I really want to taste what it tastes like. It was as if a bullet suddenly hit my heart. I deserve to die. I quickly took out 2 pieces of chocolate from my pocket and stuffed them into Oliver's mouth. As soon as it entered his mouth, his eyebrows frowned. It's so painful. The pink little tongue stuck out. I looked down and saw that the chocolate I handed him was 78% dark chocolate. A feeling called embarrassment came over me. I pinched Oliver's puffy little face. I don't think I hate him anymore.